strange to me and wild, so far from everything I've known.
I'm Maureen Long, and I was born in this district, as were several of my forebears, and I needed something to do, and my indulgence is that I've been coming to the museum for 20 years.
My name's Roger Willis. I'm married to a local girl. My connection with Amiens has been 19 years since we moved here and bought a block of land. And it was a voyage of discovery to learn that we were in an historic precinct. We knew there was an experimental farm or a training farm. It was a place where soldiers had to work for 3 months to learn how to be farmers before they took up their lot of land. And we knew the farm was somewhere nearby, but anyone we talked to had waved their arms in a vague way towards that's where it was over there, I think. And so we were a bit confused about actually nailing it down. I got interested enough to go to the State Archives, and quite by accident I stumbled across a panoramic shot of the training farm at Pikedale Soldier Settlement. And you could see the fruit trees in rows and tomatoes growing between them and the bush in the background. And of course, being Amiens on the granite belt, there was lots of granite rocks, and granite rocks are all got their own personality, and one of them stuck out as being a very unusual rock because it had like a beak structure sticking out to one side. And I thought that looked familiar, but I couldn't actually place it. The next day I was wandering around our block of land, and lo and behold, there was the rock. So I knew exactly where the state farm was, and quite particularly the orchard associated with the state farm, and we owned it. So that was like a light bulb moment of discovery that ignited my interest in things to do with history of our district.
All of the World War I people were volunteers. As time dragged on, they knew that they weren't going to come back to their jobs in a country where they're not at war, and so therefore they devised these schemes where they would give them land and training and have them make a life for themselves in agriculture. On the way home on the boats, the men were given leaflets which gave them the deal. So they were to have land, they were to have training, they were to have an infrastructure where they had a state store, they could go and get the right things. They would have supervisors who would help them. They would have inspectors who went and checked that they were doing things correctly. I don't believe there was any mention on that leaflet that they would get a big mortgage with it. The Pikedale Soldier Settlements Scheme was 17,600 acres. It was chosen because it was already a fruit growing area here. They already had a rail line to Brisbane, and they then planned and built a branch line to go out to Amiens. First of all, they came up and they were met at the train with their wives, because the wives had to be interviewed as well. They had to be suitable. The blocks were balloted, so if 3 people wanted it, the government inspectors chose or drew who would get it. These people were inexperienced, so they didn't know what to look for. The land afterwards was valued at somewhere between 110 and 210 pound. The mortgage was for £625. The mortgage was to provide them with the land, build a house, horse plough, the cost of the surveying and the cost of the roads out to there. They were actually paying for the infrastructure as well as their property. Their training only lasted for less than 2 years at the training cum experimental farm, because the manager of the training farm and the manager of the administrative side of the settlement had an argument, and the government's way of fixing that was to close down the experimental farm or the training farm. So the later men that came in had no training, even though it had been promised. And this was all included in what they were paying for, whether they got it or not. The £625 seemed a lot, but they didn't have to pay anything back for 5 years. Then they had to pay a minimal amount for 10 years, but they had 40 years to pay it all. The second mortgage, which came in less than 2 years after they'd got there, was much harsher. If you brought your grandmother's rocking chair or dining table or something like that, if you were put off your property or walking away, the second mortgage gave them the ownership of everything. I know of one family who walked away, and one of the children came in and talked to me recently, and they were still ashamed that they'd had to walk off at midnight so nobody could see their shame, and they could take only 2 suitcases of clothes with them, nothing else. If you didn't sign the second mortgage, you got put off even if you'd made your payments. And they wrote on the documents, forfeiture for failure to cultivate.
The rail line was built from Cottonvale out to the settlement to transport apples back to market. It was never meant to carry passengers, just freight. And they had these rail sidings to pick up apples at various locations, and of course the railhead at the end of the line had no name, so they had suggestions as to what these places might be called, and the practice in Queensland at the time was to use Aboriginal names. Another suggestion was to call them after Victoria Cross winners, and then someone suggested major battles that the Australians were involved in. And that got legs, and we have the names Fleurbaix and Pozieres, Bullecourt, Passchendaele, Bapaume, Messines. So those names were agreed upon, and Amiens had a number of suggestions. One was Diggerville, which mercifully didn't happen. Another was Romani, and that was abandoned because it was like Roma. Eventually Amiens was chosen. And remarkably, they pretty much follow the chronological sequence of battles that the Australians fought in going along the line. Amiens was created as a model village that was the headquarters of the Pikedale Soldier Settlement. It was carefully planned. It had an administrative area and the school, the training farm. It had a residential area and it had an industrial area where the head of the rail terminus was. So it was quite a place. It probably had about 500 people living in the village or nearby. The soldiers, of course, never really lived there. They lived in the surrounding countryside where they had small farms. The hot spot for the farming was around Amiens in the Pikedale and Marsh parishes, but they were down in Ballindine and they were down as far as the New South Wales border and out as far as Texas. So Amiens was important as the administrative centre. There was a suggestion that the rail line be extended to the arsenic mine that was nearby, because in that era things like arsenic were used to keep the bugs off the fruit. Pine trees were planted and sawmills were set up to make packing cases, so someone had thought through a business plan.
There was no shops near where they were. There was a state store which had really basic things like bags of flour and sugar and tea and things for the horses. But if you needed a tool or some furniture in your house, you had to make it. The collection here are the remnants of what some of these families have kept. And we feel very honoured that we would have them. We feel very grateful that some of these have survived and helped us tell the story, because I don't believe you'll find these things anywhere else to see. The practicality, the ingenuity of these men and women in making these things is still shown today in some of the ways that the farmers work. Tradesmen don't do so well up here because most of the farmers think they can do everything except plumbing and electrical. I like this wash trolley because it even takes the hot water away from the person pushing it. The furniture there is made out of kerosene tins and bits of board and a cotton reel for the handle on the drawer. I particularly like the crop duster, which is made with a salvital tin and a bit of singlet and a bit of a spout. These things are well thought out and they just work. I really think that the hard times in the first place made these people strong, resilient, and they worked as a unit. When the jam factory and sauce factory was accused of colouring their tomato sauce and tomato soup, there was a delegation from here went down to Brisbane to the exhibition, and they handed out their soup and their sauce, and it was guaranteed not coloured, and it was so much better accepted, more tasty than the IXL. And one lady went to McDonald East to shop, and when she asked for her stuff to be railed back to Stanthorpe, they refused to serve her. But it didn't stop them having the best sauce and the best soup.
What seemed to go wrong was that the price of apples dropped for whatever reason, and the Great Depression hit. And farming life was a bit tougher than people in the city perhaps imagined. Perhaps the blocks were too small to be viable, but in any case, some farmers failed as farmers, but others succeeded, and their descendants are still working farms in the district.
We'd pass the golden orchards and we'd whistle through the pines. There used to be 6 sidings, but now they've closed the line.
The legacy is that the Pozieres region grows 14% of the Australian apple crop, which is quite remarkable, I think, given that we live in Queensland and you think of Tasmania when it comes to apples or somewhere else. So we really are a pioneering group of people, and certainly the people that came here to Amiens were pioneers, and there are lots of names of battlefields in various locations of Australia and in fact the world. But the particular cluster of names we have that have persisted in this district is unique in Australia.
We set this room up, and the more we did, the more we wanted to do, and the more things came into us to help us put it together so that they can see how hard it was. And this wasn't a handout to the soldiers, and it wasn't all roses.
For 12 miles and 25 chains through orchards, scrub and pines, riding on the fruit train on the Amiens branch line. For 12 miles and 25 chains through orchards, scrub and pines, riding on the fruit train on the Amiens branch line.